Hey guys, welcome to Photo 2. I am Mr. Johnson, your teacher for this semester, and this short video is to help you get caught up on the things you probably should have learned in Photo 1, but maybe you didn't for whatever reason. So, let's get started. Alright guys, there's 3 things you need to know, and you need to know them very well if you want to do good in this class. And those 3 things are, first is the shutter and shutter speed. What they do and how they work together, very important. Second is the aperture and the f-stops, also very important. Third is the ISO. All 3 of these things work together hand in hand, and if you want to do well in this class, you got to know what they do, how they do it, and why each one of them is important. So, let's get started. Alright guys, in order to really understand how the shutter, the aperture, and the ISO all work together, you first have to make sure you understand how a camera works. So let's take 2 or 3 minutes and just do a real quick explanation of how cameras work. Every camera needs to have 3 things in order to be a camera. The first one is it has to have a hole or a lens or something on the front of it whose job is to collect and focus light. Let me say that again, and I'm going to get closer so you know how important it is. The lens's job, and its main job, is to collect and focus light. Collect and focus light. That's why we have these big lenses on the front of our cameras, and that is what they do. Their job is for the light to come in through the front of the lens as this big, blurry, unfocused mess, and the light is going to collect it, and it's going to focus it, and it's going to give us beautiful photographs. The lens's job, once again, is collect and focus the light. Okay guys, real quickly, the other 2 things that an object needs in order for it to be a camera is, first one of course was a lens. The second is a light tight box, and that's what these cameras are. These cameras do not let any light in unless we tell them to let light in. Imagine like a waterproof case for, you could put your phone in and you could drop it in a swimming pool and no water gets in. These cameras do the exact same thing. No light gets into this camera unless we tell it we want light to get in. And the third thing that everything needs, every object needs if it wants to be a camera, is it has to have a shutter, which is something that we use to control when the light gets in. When we press the button on the camera, when we press the shutter release, this button is called, what happens is it tells the shutter, okay, open up, let some light in, and then it tells it to close again. Okay, so those are the 3 things. Let's go back now. Let's talk a little bit more about what happens, how light gets into the camera, and how the whole photographic process works. So what happens is the light comes in through the lens, and then it goes into the camera, and I want to show you something cool that not a lot of people have a good understanding of. Okay, what's inside the camera? Once it gets through the lens, can you see this mirror right here? What happens is the light comes through the lens and it hits this mirror, and what happens is let me back up a little bit. It comes in and it hits the mirror and it bounces straight up because the mirror's at a 45-degree angle. So the lens comes in, bounces straight up off of that mirror, and then it goes into this little prism thingamajigger that's right in here. And basically what the light does is it comes in and goes, bounces off the mirror, and goes, and then it comes back out through this little hole on the back of the camera that's called a viewfinder. Okay? And so when we're looking through our viewfinder, we are seeing the exact same thing that the lens and the camera are seeing. This is important because back in the old days, before they came up with the old concept of the mirror and the prism, you used to have a separate hole that was kind of like right here, and so you weren't seeing exactly what the camera saw, which resulted in pictures that the photographer didn't really want because they weren't getting exactly what they wanted. So this is really cool. We get to see exactly what's going on through the camera. Alright guys, so now we know what's happening. The light's coming in, hitting the mirror, going through the prism, coming out up here. But what happens in that exact moment when we push the shutter release button and we take a picture? Let's talk about that. What happens is this little mirror in here that the light is bouncing off of, instead of bouncing the light off of it and going up into the prism, what it does is the mirror goes up. Let me raise it up here. Check this out. The mirror raises up like this, and now you can see behind it. If you could see in there, you would be looking at the shutter. The shutter is covering up what I call the digital sensor. The digital sensor is what records your photograph. Okay, so the light comes in, the mirror goes up, the shutter opens, and then there's this digital sensor. This is what used to be film back in the old days, back when I was just a wee lad. But now it's this fancy, extremely high-tech, extremely expensive digital sensor. The light hits that digital sensor. There's some kind of fancy electronical technological interaction that happens, and it records your photograph and then transfers it over to your memory card. So the photo is actually recorded on the digital sensor and then transferred to your memory card. The light hits that digital sensor and it says, oh, that looks like a picture of Mr. Johnson. He's handsome, he's attractive, he's good looking. I'm going to take a picture of him and transfer it over to the memory card. And that's how it works. So what the shutter does is it hides that digital sensor until the exact moment that we're ready to take the photo. So here we go. I'm going to push the button. I'm not really going to do it because this camera won't take pictures without a lens on it. Okay, but let's say I push the button. What happens is the mirror goes up, the shutter opens, and then the light hits the digital sensor, and then the shutter closes again. It looks something like this. Okay, imagine this handsome face right here is the digital sensor. This is what is going to record the picture. So the shutter looks like this. It's closed and you can't see the digital sensor, right? No light is getting in. The shutter is keeping the light from getting in. My hands are the shutter. As soon as I push the button, the mirror goes up and goes whoop, and it gets out of the way. And then the shutter opens and goes whoop, and the light's coming in, it's hitting the digital sensor, and then the bottom part of the shutter closes like this, boom! And now no more light is getting in. Okay? It kind of looks like a curtain on a stage, only it goes up and down instead of sideways. It opens, whoop! The light gets in, the picture is recorded, and it closes. In fact, let me show you this video where you can see what it looks like in real life. These guys recorded a shutter opening and closing with a super high-speed camera so that they could slow it down. This actually happens in the blink of an eye in a split second, but they've slowed it down so that our eyes can see it, because normally we can't. It happens too fast. Check this video out. Alright guys, let's talk about what you just saw in that video. You saw the shutter open and close 3 times. The first time was regular speed. The second time was slowed down to about 1/4 speed. And the third time was slowed down really slow so that we could really see what was happening. So let's walk you through it. What you saw was the mirror go up, revealing the shutter. Okay, so the shutter was closed. When the mirror went up, you couldn't see the digital sensor. You then saw the shutter drop down and open, and then we could see the digital sensor for a second. And then the top plate closed, and then the mirror dropped back down. The shutter was only open for 1/200th of a second. Think about that. Think about something happening 200 times in 1 second. When you take one of those times, that's 1/200th of a second. That's really fast. Let's watch it again now that you know what you were looking at, and see how it looks. So there you go. You saw what it looks like. You saw the shutter opening. You saw that bluish, grayish screen back there. That's the digital sensor. Then you saw the shutter closing again. And this all happens very quickly. It can happen as fast as 1/8000th of a second on our cameras. Think about that. Think about something happening 8,000 times in 1 second. And then you take one of those. That's 1/8000th of a second. That's really fast. 2 more reelies. That's how fast it was. We can also go down on our cameras to as slow as 30 seconds. And what that means is the shutter opens, whoop, and then it stays open for 30 seconds, and then it closes. Now the types of photos that we could take with the shutter speed of 30 seconds and 1/8000th of a second are totally different, which is why we need to have a good understanding of shutter speeds. So let's talk about those for a little bit. Alright guys, time to have a friendly little heart-to-heart chat about shutter speed. Let's start with our very first shutter speed, the one that every other shutter speed is based off of, and it's this very simple shutter speed that you can see right here. It's 1 second, and it is, well, 1 second. What that means is that the shutter opens, stays open for exactly 1 second, and then closes again, not letting any more light in. Pretty simple. Now you need to understand all shutter speeds other than 1 second are either slower than 1 second or faster than 1 second. Ones that are slower than 1 second are obviously going to be 2 seconds, or anything that is longer or more time than 1 second. Anything that's faster than 1 second is going to be numbers that are less than 1. These are all going to be fractions. One other thing you need to keep in mind is these bad boys right here. Whenever you see these, that means we are dealing with seconds. So if we're doing a shutter speed of 4 seconds, you'll see a 4 followed by the quotation marks. Okay? That means 4 seconds. Whenever you see these quotation marks, you know we're dealing with seconds. Oh, it's a little happy face. Okay, quotation marks equal seconds. And that will make more sense here in just a second. So our very first shutter speed is 1 second. Let's talk about shutter speeds that are faster than 1 second, meaning the shutter is open for less time than 1 second, shall we? Our first one that we're going to talk about is 1/2 of a second. Now this should be a fraction. It should be written in fraction format like this. It should be 1/2. But we don't do that in the photography world. We just write 2, and everybody knows that if it's 2 without the quotation marks, that it's 1/2 of a second. Okay, so you're not going to see fractions on any of these, but you need to know that these are fractions. They are less than 1, so they have to be 1/2 is less than 1. So let's keep moving across and see what we find here. The next one is going to be 4, and again, this is a fraction. This will be the last time I do it, but this one should be 1/4 because it's 1/4 of a second. Okay, let's keep moving across here. The next one here is 8. Now, are you starting to see a pattern here? 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. These double every time we move to the right. They're actually getting cut in half. They're not typically actually doubling because we are getting lower. But let's just make things easy to remember. And let's just say that every time we move from one shutter speed to the next, that our shutter speed doubles. Which means if I gave you a shutter speed of 1 second and I told you, tell me the rest of the shutter speeds, all you got to be able to do is multiply by 2, and you should be able to do it. With a few exceptions. And the first exception is our next one, which it should be 16 because 8 times 2 is 16, but it's actually 15. There's 2 of these. There's this one, and then there's going to be another one that's going to come up that are a little bit tricky. Okay, so just remember that 8 times 2 should be 16, but in the photography world, it's actually 15. Kind of annoying, right? But then after that, we get back on track. 15 times 2 is what? 30. 30 times 2 is 60. And here's our next tricky one. 60 times 2 should be 120, but it's actually 125. Gosh dang it. If you can remember those two, though, you can remember and quickly memorize all of the shutter speeds. From here on out, it's pretty straightforward. We go from 125 to 250. 250 goes to 500. 500 goes to 1,000, to 2,000, to 4,000, to 8,000. For the last time, I promise I'll never say this again, these are fractions. This is not 8,000 seconds. This is 1/8,000th of a second. Really, really, really fast. Okay? So now let's look at what happens when we go the other way. There are shutter speeds that are slower or longer than 1. And those, I bet you could guess what they are. What do you think is going to go right here? 2 seconds. It's going to be the same numbers that are over here, only this time they're going to have the quotation marks, which means they are seconds. So this is 2 seconds. This is 1/2 of a second. This is 4 seconds. This is 1/4 of a second. This is 8 seconds. This is 1/8 of a second. And so on and so forth. This is 15 seconds. And this is 30 seconds. So there you have it, folks. There are all of our shutter speeds. All right, guys, before we can really dive into what shutter speeds do or how they work, you need to note that the shutter has 2 jobs. And its first job is to control how much light gets into the camera. Okay, we're going to talk about that in a second. But you could imagine that more light gets into the camera when you take a photo at 30 seconds than gets in when you take a photo at 1/8,000th of a second. That should be pretty much common sense. Job number 2 is to control whether objects in motion are blurry or frozen. And what I mean by that is if you take a photo of something moving at 30 seconds, that something is going to be a big blurry blob in the photograph. If you take a photo of something moving at 1/8,000th of a second, that something is probably going to be frozen unless it's moving extremely fast, like a bullet or something like that. So those are the two jobs of the shutter speed. This is important to know and is worth writing down. So let's take a look at what happens here when we use the two different shutter speeds, shall we? Okay, so on this end of the spectrum we have 30 seconds, and these shutter speeds are considered what we would call slow, which means that these ones over here are fast. These ones over here are going to let in lots of light into the camera. And these ones over here are going to let in not much light. Alright, making sense so far? And lastly, objects in motion taken at these slow shutter speeds are going to be blurry. So I'm going to write out here, objects in motion are blurry. And obviously over here we're going to write out objects in motion are frozen. There you have it, you guys. You should now be experts on the shutter and shutter speeds. What they do, how the shutter works, and what kind of photos you would take with different shutter speeds. Let's take a look at a few sample photos just to kind of cement everything into your brains that we've talked about, and we should be good to go. Okay, this photo here was clearly taken with a fast shutter speed. You can see it has frozen this water drop in motion. This is something that normally happens so fast our human eye wouldn't even be able to see it. It just comes and goes too fast. We would never see this. This is taken with a very fast shutter speed. Take a look at this one. Same thing, also very fast shutter speed. This is a bubble being popped. This happens in a split second faster than we can see it. But because the photographer was using a very fast shutter speed, we were able to catch it. Okay, look at this crazy dude jumping up out of the water. Somehow he got his hair all wet. Look at how you can see every individual drop of water. That's pretty impressive. That's a fast shutter speed right there. Okay, here's some ice cubes being dropped into a drink. Again, fast shutter speed. Here's me when I went surfing just the other weekend. Okay, fast shutter speed. We froze our object in motion. This guy's not hanging there like that. He was there only for a split second while the fast shutter speed caught him like that. Okay, this was taken with a slow shutter speed. The shutter was probably open for about 5 seconds, long enough for the person to take a flashlight and draw this shape. This is called light painting, and you should have done this in Photo 1. And if you are in Photo 1, we are going to do this. Okay, here's some water going down a stream. This is probably an exposure of 2 or 3 seconds. And this is, notice how the water looks silky and smooth. That's because in the time that the shutter was open, the water was moving quite a bit. So it's got this blurry, soft look. Notice the rocks here look perfectly fine because they didn't move at all. They were not objects in motion. So they stayed the same in the photograph. Okay, this is a nighttime photograph. These are cars driving down the freeway here. And they just look like big light streaks because the shutter was open in the time from these cars when they were way down here all the way through the frame. So they just come out as blurry light streaks. Pretty cool. And here's another slow shutter speed. She's not in motion, so she stayed still, except for her skirt. Look at that. It was flapping a little bit. But this subway train was whizzing past. And so this is a slow shutter speed, probably around a half or a fourth of a second. Here's another one at the carnival, the little tilt-a-whirl spinning at nighttime. Slow shutter speed. And here's another one of some water. You can see the same. We get the same look of the water coming out and getting this kind of blurry, soft, silky look. So there you go. There is a very, very good explanation of fast and slow shutter speeds and what they do. Alright guys, so here's our camera. I promise I'll try to make this quick. When we want to be in control of the shutter speed, the first thing we have to do is we have to set our mode wheel right over here. We've got to put this guy on the letter S. The S stands for shutter priority, meaning we're going to tell the camera what shutter speed we want to use. We're going to let the camera figure everything else out for us. Okay, so I've got my mode wheel to S. Let's look over here on the other side of the camera. Here is our little panel that gives us all the information. Notice there's no numbers right here. In order to be able to see our shutter speed, to see what it's set at, we have to tap the shutter release button, which is just right here. If we just give that a little tap and let go, you can see the shutter speed and the f-stop will show up right here. If I don't do anything for a couple seconds, it's going to go away, and once it's gone, I can no longer change the shutter speed. So I need that to come back up. I'm going to tap the shutter release button, and look, my shutter speed right now is set to 1/30th of a second. Okay? For some reason, whenever they do their zeros on this camera, they always do these lowercase zeros. I don't quite understand it. I don't know why they do it. But just know that this right here is 1/30th of a second. How do I know it's not 30 seconds? I'll tell you how. Because I can't see these little quotation marks after it. See, this is 4 seconds because it's a 4 with the little tiny quotation marks after it, which of course means seconds. So check this out. By tapping the shutter release, making sure the camera is awake, I can now move this rear dial on the camera. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. This rear dial right here on the back of the camera, tap the shutter release, let go of it, and as I turn this rear dial, notice as I turn it to the left, the shutter speed is getting slower. I got it all the way down to 30 seconds. As I go and I turn it to the right, the shutter speed's getting faster. We can go all the way up to 1/8,000th of a second here to take our photos. So that's how we set and change our shutter speed on the camera. Important things to remember are the mode wheel must be on S and the camera must be awake. You gotta tap the shutter release and let go, and you got about 5 seconds before the camera goes back to sleep. As long as you start turning it, it'll stay awake until you stop. To the left gives us a slower shutter speed, and to the right gives us faster shutter speeds. Hey guys, remember earlier when I said that the shutter's first job is to control how much light gets into the camera? Well, this is a very important job because every photograph that gets taken has to have just the right amount of light that gets in. If you let too much light in, the photo gets too bright. And if you don't let enough light in, the photo is too dark. So to get the perfect photo, you have to let in just the right amount of light. And the shutter's first job is to control that light, which leads to a couple of interesting situations. Let's take a look at those. Alright you guys, as you can see, I'm here in my classroom and it seems like it might be kind of bright in here, but it's actually not. These lights in this school are very dim and they don't create a lot of light. It looks like they do, but trust me, they don't. So I'm in my room and I want to show you, look at this. I've got my shutter speed set to 500. You can see that right here, set to 500th. That's 1/500th of a second. Now, check it out. I'm going to take a photo of that camera that's over there in the corner. You can see it right there. I'm going to take a picture of that at 1/500th of a second, and let's see how it turns out. Okay guys, that's coming out really dark, and the reason why is because 1/500th of a second is a very fast shutter speed. It does not let in very much light, and since we're in a room that's already kind of dark, the photo's going to turn out dark. Let's see what we would have to do to solve this situation to get a better photo. Okay guys, what I did is I went in and I changed my shutter speed. You can see that I lowered it down to 1/30th of a second. I went from 1/500th of a second to 1/30th of a second. I'm going to take the exact same picture this time. All I did was change the shutter speed. I lowered it down. I slowed it down to let more light into the camera. Let's take a look at how that looks. Okay, that looks a lot better, doesn't it? It looks right. It's not too dark. It's not too bright. By lowering down the shutter speed in a place where it was pretty dark in here, it made our photo look better. So in review, if you're inside and it's kind of dark, you can't get away with fast shutter speeds. Well, you can, but you got to know a couple other tricks, and that will come later. Okay, let's go outside and see what happens. Alright guys, so I'm outside now. It's really not even that bright out here. It's cloudy. It's kind of early in the morning. It's dark clouds. It's not that bright, but I want to show you how much brighter it is out here than it was inside. I got my camera set up. I got my shutter speed set to 1/10th of a second. You can see there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a photo out here of this scene behind me. Let's take a look at that. You can tell that came out really, really bright. We're using a slow shutter speed outside where it's bright, and you can't really do that. There's too much light out here. That slow shutter speed's gonna let too much light into the camera. So what we have to do in these situations is we have to use faster shutter speeds so that our photos don't come out too bright. So I'm gonna go ahead and switch my shutter speed right now. Let's see, I was at 10. I'm gonna speed it up. I'm gonna go all the way up to, let's go all the way to 1/500th of a second and see how that looks. That's a much better looking photo, isn't it? Okay. So what we just learned is that when there's more light, we have to use faster shutter speeds. When there's less light, we have to use slower shutter speeds. We combine that knowledge, we use that knowledge, we can go out, we can create great photos wherever we are. Okay, so here's a couple other things we need to be aware of when we're thinking of shutter speeds and the shutter. One of them is that you need to be aware of camera shake. And what I mean by that is that some of the slower shutter speeds, and by that I mean probably anything from 1/30th of a second or slower, so that would be 1/30th, 1/15th, 1/8th, 1/4th, 1/2, 1 second, all the way to 30 seconds. Anywhere between 1/30th and 30 seconds, you should probably be using a tripod, because 1/30th of a second may not seem like very much time in our minds, but for a camera, that's actually a really slow shutter speed. And what happens is there's a good possibility that if you're taking a photo for 1/30th of a second, that you're not going to be able to hold the camera perfectly still for that entire time. So check this out. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and take a photo. I've got my shutter speed set to 1/8th of a second. You can see right there's 1/8. Okay, and that's really slow. That's hard to hold it still that long. Like I said, anywhere up to 1/30th of a second, you really need to be using a tripod. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on something over here and take a picture of it. Let's take a look at this photo. You can see that that photo came out blurry. It's not, the camera was not holding still during that time. This is really easy to do, is to end up with blurry photos when we're using slow shutter speeds, which is why I recommend anything slower than 1/30th of a second, you have your camera on a tripod. They are annoying, they're hard to use, they are uncomfortable to carry around, but they are absolutely worth it. Every great photographer uses a tripod. If you want to be good, you gotta be comfortable using a tripod. Absolutely necessary for anything slower than 1/30th of a second. All right, congratulations guys, we've made it to the end. You should now be experts on the shutter and the shutter speed, what it does, how it works, and why it's important. Up next, we need to talk about the aperture and the f-stop. But for now, take a break and congratulate yourself. You made it through some pretty heavy duty stuff here. Good job.